Today I'm going to be reading chapter 4 of The Secret Garden. It's quite a long chapter, so I'm going to split it into a few parts. Chapter 4, Martha. When she opened her eyes in the morning, it was because a young housemaid had come into her room to light the fire, and was kneeling on the hearthrug, raking out the cinders noisily. Mary lay and watched her for a few moments, and then began to look about the room. She had never seen a room at all like it, and thought it curious and gloomy. The walls were covered with tapestry, with a forest scene embroidered on it. There were fantastically dressed people under the trees, and to the distance there was a glimpse of the turrets of a castle. There were hunters and horses and dogs and ladies. Mary felt as if she were in the forest with them. Out of a deep window she could see a great climbing stretch of land, which seemed to have no trees on it, and to look rather like an endless dull purplish sea. "What is that?" she said, pointing out of the window. Martha, the young housemaid, who had just risen to her feet, looked and pointed also. "That there," she said. "Yes, that's the moor," with a good-natured grin. "Does thou like it?" "No," answered Mary. "I hate it." "That's 'cause thou'rt not used to it," Martha said, going back to her hearth. "Thou thinks it's too big and bare now, but thou will like it." "Do you?" inquired Mary. "Aye, that I do," answered Martha, cheerfully polishing away at the grate. "I just love it. It's none bare. It's covered with grand things and smells sweet. It's fair lovely in spring and summer, when the gorse and broom and heather's in flower. It smells of honey, and there's such a lot of fresh air. And the sky looks so high, and bees and skylark make such a nice noise, humming and singing. I wouldn't live away from the moor for anything." Mary listened to her with a grave, puzzled expression. The native servants she had been so used to in India were not at the least like this. They were obsequious and servile, and did not presume to talk to their masters as if they were their equals. They made salaams and called them protectors of the poor, and names of that sort. Indian servants were commanded to do things, not asked. It was not the custom to say please and thank you, and Mary had always slapped her ayah in the face when she was angry. She wondered a little what this girl would do if one slapped her in the face. She was a round, rosy, good-natured looking creature, but she had a sturdy way which made Mistress Mary wonder if she might not even slap back, if the person who slapped her was only a little girl. "You are a strange servant," she said from her pillows rather haughtily. Martha sat up on her heels, with her blackling brush in her hand, and laughed, without seeming the least out of temper. "I know that," she said. "If there was a grand missus at Misselthwaite, I should never have been even one of the under-housemaids. I might have been let to be a scullery maid, but I'd never have been let upstairs. I'm too common, and I talk too much. But this is a funny house, for all it's so grand. Seems like there's neither master nor mistress, except Mr. Pitcher and Mrs. Medlock. Mr. Craven, he won't be troubled about anything when he's here, and he's nearly always away. Mrs. Medlock gave me the place out of kindness. She told me she could never have done it if Misselthwaite had been like other big houses." "Are you going to be my servant?" Mary asked, still in her imperious little Indian way. Martha began to rub the grate again. "I'm Mrs. Medlock's servant," she said stoutly, "and she's Mr. Craven's. But I'm to do the housemaid's work up here and wait on you a bit. But you won't need much waiting on." "Who is going to dress me?" demanded Mary. Martha sat up in her heels again and stared. "Canna thou dress thyself?" she said. "What do you mean? I don't understand your language," said Mary. "I forgot," Martha said. "Mrs. Medlock told me I'd have to be careful, or you wouldn't know what I was saying. I mean, can't you put on your own clothes?" "No," answered Mary, quite indignantly. "I never did in my life. My ayah dressed me, of course." "Well," said Martha, evidently not in the least aware that she was impudent, "it's time thou should learn. Thou cannot begin younger. It'll do thee good to wait on thyself a bit. My mother always said she couldn't see why grand people's children didn't turn out fair fools, what with nurses and being washed and dressed and took out to walks as if they were puppies." "It is different in India," said Mistress Mary disdainfully. She could scarcely stand this. But Martha was not at all crushed. "I can see it's different," she answered, almost sympathetically. "I dare say it's because there's such a lot of blacks instead of respectable white people. When I heard you was coming from India, I thought you was a black too." Mary sat up in bed, furious. "What?" she said. What, you thought I was a native? You daughter of a pig!" Martha stared and looked hot. "Who are you calling names?" she said. "You needn't be so vexed. That's not the way for a young lady to talk. I've nothing against the blacks. When you read about them in tracts, they're always very religious. You always read as a black man's and a brother. I've never seen a black, and I was fair pleased to think I was going to see one close. When I come in to light the fire this morning, I crept to your bed and pulled the cover back carefully to look at you, and there you was, disappointedly, no more black than me. For all, you're so much yellower." Mary did not even try to control her rage and humiliation. "You thought I was a native? You dared! You don't know anything about natives. They are not people. They're servants who must salaam to you. You know nothing about India. You know nothing about anything." She was in such a rage and felt so hopeless before the girl's simple stare, and somehow she suddenly felt so horribly lonely and far away from everything she understood and which understood her, that she threw herself face downward on the pillow and burst into passionate sobbing. She sobbed so unrestrainedly that good-natured Martha was a little frightened and quite sorry for her. She went to the bed and bent over her. "You mustn't cry like that there," she begged. "You mustn't, for sure. I didn't know you'd be vexed. I don't know anything about anything, just like you said. I beg your pardon, miss. Do stop crying." There was something comforting and really friendly in her queer speech and sturdy way, which had a good effect on Mary. She gradually ceased crying and became quiet. Martha looked relieved. "It's time for thee to get up now," she said. "Mrs. Medlock said I was to carry thou breakfast and tea and dinner into the room next to this. It's been made into a nursery for thee. I'll help thee on with thy clothes, if thou will get out of bed. It's the buttons at the back that cannot be buttoned them up thyself." When Mary at last decided to get up, the clothes Martha took from the wardrobe were not the ones she had worn when she arrived the night before with Mrs. Medlock. "Those are not mine," she said. "Mine are black." She looked at the thick white wool coat and dress over, and added with cool approval, "Those are nicer than mine." "These are the ones thou must put on," Martha answered. "Mr. Craven ordered Mrs. Medlock to get 'em in London. He said I won't have a child dressed in black wandering about like a lost soul. He said it'd make the place sadder than it is. Put colour on her." Mother said she knew what he meant. Mother always knows what a boy means. She doesn't hold with black herself. "I hate black things," said Mary. The dressing process was one which taught them both something. Martha had buttoned up her little sister and brother, but she had never seen a child who stood so still and waited for another person to do things for her, as if she had neither hands nor feet of her own. "Why doesn't thou put on thou own shoes?" she said, when Mary quietly held out her foot. "My ayah did it," answered Mary, staring. "It was the custom." She said that very often. It was the custom. The native servants were always saying it. If one told them to do something their ancestors had not done for 1,000 years, they gazed at one mildly and said, "It is not the custom." And one knew that that was the end of the matter. It had not been the custom that Mistress Mary should do anything but stand and allow herself to be dressed like a doll. But before she was ready for breakfast, she began to suspect that her life at Misselthwaite Manor would end by teaching her a number of things quite new to her. Things such as putting on her own clothes, shoes and stockings, and picking up things she'd let fall. If Martha had been a well-trained, fine young lady's maid, she would have been more subservient and respectful, and would have known that it was her business to brush hair and button boots and pick things up and play them away. She was, however, only an untrained Yorkshire rustic who had been brought up in a moorland college with a swarm of little brothers and sisters who had never dreamed of doing anything but waiting on themselves and on the younger ones, who were either babes in arms or just learning to totter about and tumble over things.